The sky was bleeding itself out over the prairie, a vast red wound fading to purple. Wind whispered through sagebrush and dry grass, carrying the scent of dust and cattle. The ranch stood alone, its wood weathered gray by years of sun and storms, a crooked fence marking the edge of land that felt more like exile than home. The man repairing the fence moved slow and steady, each twist of wire deliberate. His hands were rough, scarred, a story told in calluses and powder burns. The brim of his hat shadowed a face carved from solitude, eyes pale and watchful, like a hawk's. He worked without hurry, but there was a tension in him, a readiness sharpened by years spent living where law came too slow and death too quick. When the wind shifted, he stopped. Something in the air had changed. The prairie was never silent, not truly, but now the cicadas had gone quiet, and the distant coyotes had stopped their mournful chorus. He straightened, squinting toward the horizon, sensing wrongness like a cold hand at the back of his neck. His horse, tied nearby, stamped nervously. He set the pliers down, slid his rifle from its scabbard, and swung into the saddle without a word. The dying sun threw long shadows across the land as he rode, each hoofbeat muffled in the dust. He followed no path, only instinct. The old hunter sensed that danger left a mark as clear as boot prints. He crested a rise, and his gut tightened. Black birds circled low in the distance, their harsh cries echoing over the plain. He urged the horse forward, lantern swinging from his saddle horn, casting jittery light over rocks and scrub. The prairie rolled out empty, but emptiness here always felt like a threat, a gunman's pause before the draw. Then he saw it. A tree alone on a rise, branches reaching out like crooked fingers. Something swung beneath it. He reined in hard. At first, in the half-light, he thought it was a scarecrow. Then the lantern caught the curve of a bare foot, the gleam of black hair. His breath came sharp. A girl, no older than 12, hung limp from a rope looped over the branch. Her head tilted at a terrible angle, eyes half-lidded, reflecting the lantern's glow like dull glass. Her dress, rough-spun and torn, fluttered in the night breeze. She looked impossibly small against the empty sky. There was a sign tied to her chest, a rough plank with words scratched in charcoal. "White man don't forgive." The man swung down from his horse, moving slow as if the ground might crack beneath him. He slipped his knife from his belt, cut her down. The body fell weightless into his arms, so light she might have been made of straw. He laid her gently in the grass, the earth cool and damp beneath her. For a long moment, he knelt there, hat in his hands, breath shallow. She was gone, long gone, but warmth lingered in her skin, as if she'd only just been silenced. He looked at the sign, fingers tracing the jagged letters. Rage burned low in him, quiet and steady, like coals that never cooled. This wasn't a killing born of panic or fear. This was a message. The horse whinnied softly, uneasy. He stood, lantern high, scanning the ground. The prairie told stories to those who could read them. He saw it now. Boot prints deep in the dirt, at least 4, maybe 5 men. Horses, 2, heavy shod and carrying weight. The prints led north, fresh enough that the dust hadn't blown over them. Whoever left this warning hadn't gone far. He crouched by the tree again, fingers brushing the girl's hair back from her face. She had a narrow jaw, high cheekbones, the copper skin of Apache blood. The rope had bitten deep into her neck, a cruel mark that made his throat tighten. He wasn't a man given to prayer, but something old stirred in him, some wordless vow whispered to the stars above. He fetched his shovel from the saddle and began to dig. The work was slow, the soil dry and unyielding, but he dug until his shoulders ached. He laid her in the shallow grave, folding her hands over her chest, and covered her with earth until the prairie looked whole again. He found a piece of driftwood nearby, sharp in one end, and drove it into the ground as a marker. The sign with its hateful scrawl he kept. It wasn't for her grave. It was evidence. When he mounted up again, the lantern light caught his face. The loneliness was still there, etched deep into the lines around his eyes, but now it shared space with something harder. He was a man who'd built a life out of silence, who'd learned to keep his head down, tend to his cattle, and let the world kill itself without him. But as he looked back at that small mound of earth, the choice was gone. He turned the horse toward the tracks, guiding it into a steady trot. The prairie stretched endless before him, a black ocean under a sky bright with cold stars. Somewhere out there, men rode with blood on their hands, laughing over the body of a child they'd strung up like a trophy. The lantern swung, casting fleeting circles of light, and his rifle lay across his lap. His shadow stretched long over the land, a lone rider cutting through the dark. As the night deepened, the wind rose, whispering to the sage like a voice too soft to hear. The man didn't look back. Far behind him, the wooden marker stood against the sky, a silent witness to a promise only he had heard. The town lay huddled in a shallow basin, lantern light flickering through the dust haze like stars swallowed by a storm. He rode in slow, the steady clop of his horse's hooves echoing down an empty main street lined with false front buildings and sagging porches. A swinging saloon door creaked in the wind, and the scent of whiskey and wood smoke clung to the night air. He had been here before, long ago, back when the streets had been busier and his heart not yet calcified by loss. Now, the place felt hollowed out, a shell of wary faces and shuttered windows. He tied his horse outside the sheriff's office, lantern swinging from a hook, and pushed through the door. Inside, the sheriff sat hunched behind a scarred desk, pipe smoke curling toward the rafters. He was a man whose belly spoke louder than his badge, with eyes dulled by fear or drink. The rancher laid the wooden sign on the desk. The sheriff studied it for a long time, his fingers tracing the crude lettering. "Apache girl," he muttered finally, voice low, as if saying aloud might summon ghosts. The rancher nodded. The sheriff leaned back, chair groaning beneath him. "Could be renegades," he said, tone hollow. "Could be some folks tired of raids. Folks are wound tight these days. Folks strung up a child." The rancher's voice was flat, stripped of emotion, but heavy with accusation. The sheriff's jaw worked, but he said nothing. The silence between them was thick as tar. The rancher had seen that silence before. Out on the frontier, law was often a mask for fear. "You're not going to do a damn thing, are you?" the rancher said. The sheriff's gaze flickered to the rifle slung over the rancher's shoulder. "Ain't wise stirring up more blood. Town's scared enough. Let it lie." The rancher gathered the sign, his movements slow, deliberate. "Then I'll take care of it." He left without waiting for an answer. The saloon across the street glowed warm and inviting, laughter and piano music spilling into the cool night. But inside, the air reeked of stale beer and desperation. He took a seat at the far end of the bar, hat low over his eyes, and ordered whiskey. The barkeep, a wiry man with deep-set eyes, poured without a word. He drank slow, scanning the room. A handful of men played cards, their voices low and tense. A woman in a faded red dress leaned against the piano, smiling without warmth at a man who smelled of sweat and tobacco. Conversations hushed when he entered, though none dared look too long. He'd been away too long to be familiar, but men like him carried an aura that drew attention. The steady calm of someone who'd seen too much killing to fear more. At a nearby table, two men whispered, voices slurred with drink. He didn't catch every word, but he heard enough. "Rebs. Same bastards that hit the freight wagon. They're holed up north near the dry creek." His pulse slowed, sharpened. "Not Apaches. Raiders. Ex-Confederate soldiers turned predators, preying on the weak and stirring up tension between settlers and tribes, leaving bodies as warnings. Men without allegiance, only hunger. He knew their kind. He fought beside some, back when the war turned men into wolves." The barkeep leaned close as he refilled the glass. "Best keep your nose out of this," he murmured. "Those men, they don't forgive neither." The rancher slid a coin across the counter. "Neither do I." He left the saloon with the sound of laughter snapping shut behind him like a trap. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying grit that stung his face. He walked back to his horse, adjusting the cinch, movements calm but efficient. The street was nearly deserted now, shadows stretching long beneath lanterns. Somewhere a dog barked, then fell silent. As he mounted, a memory rose unbidden. His wife standing in the doorway of their old cabin, sunlight turning her hair gold. She'd been gone for years now, taken by a fever that swept the plains like wildfire. Their boy had followed her not long after, a coughing fit stealing the breath from his small chest. He'd buried them both on a hill near the river, where wildflowers grew in spring, and since then, the ranch had been nothing but duty. He had learned to live with grief like a second skin, but tonight, seeing that girl's lifeless body swinging in the wind, it had torn open old wounds. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle wailed, a long, lonely cry that echoed over the prairie. He guided the horse out of town, past the last flickering lanterns, and into open darkness. The trail north was dry and narrow, bordered by mesquite and low hills. He rode with a rifle across his lap, eyes scanning every shadow. He wasn't a man who sought trouble, but trouble always seemed to find him. Maybe that was a curse of surviving when so many hadn't. Death had marked him once and kept circling back. Hours passed, the moon rising high, casting silver over the barren land. He stopped once to water the horse at a shallow stream and to study the tracks he'd been following since sunset. The raiders weren't careful. They thought themselves safe, far from law and judgment. But judgment had found them tonight, in the form of a quiet man who had nothing left to lose. He sat on his heels, tracing a boot print in the dirt with his finger, then rose and mounted again. The prairie stretched wide around him, silent but for the wind. By the time he reached the edge of an old cattle trail, the eastern horizon was paling. Dawn approached, slow and merciless. He reined in at the top of a ridge and looked down. Smoke rose faintly from a camp nestled near a dry creek bed. Even at this distance, he could see horses tied to posts, the flicker of firelight, silhouettes moving among the shadows. There were more of them than he'd hoped, at least a dozen, men hardened by war and turned loose on the world. He sat in the saddle for a long moment, watching. He wasn't reckless. He never had been. But justice didn't always wear a badge. Sometimes it came on horseback, wearing the same weary face as vengeance. He dismounted, crouched low, and checked his rifle. The wood was worn smooth where his hands had gripped it through countless nights like this. His jaw tightened as he studied the camp again. The girl's lifeless face burned in his mind, her body swinging against a sky that didn't care. The wind carried the smell of smoke and unwashed men. He knew this would not be easy, and he didn't care. Some things were worth dying for. He led his horse into a thicket of mesquite and tied the reins loosely, then sat with his back against a rock, waiting for the light to strengthen. His breath came slow, steady, but his eyes burned with a quiet fire. The prairie, wide and merciless, watched without judgment. The first shot came at dawn. It split the quiet with a crack that rolled across the hills like thunder. The rancher threw himself behind a rock as dust spat up near his boot. Another shot followed, sharper, closer. His heart slowed to a steady thud as instinct took over. He crawled along the ridge, rifle cradled in his arms, breath measured. A figure moved among the mesquite below, a raider scout, rifle braced against a crooked branch. The man's face was hard to see, just a flicker of pale skin beneath a battered hat, but the glint of his weapon gave him away. The rancher waited for him to shift position, then fired once. The shot echoed to the dry creek bed, and the scout tumbled backward, his rifle clattering against stone. The sound carried far. Voices rose from the camp, rough shouts cutting through the morning air. Horses screamed, hooves pounding against hard ground. The rancher slipped down the ridge, using boulders for cover. He moved like a man who'd done this before, every step silent, deliberate. But there were too many of them. A bullet sang past his ear, splintering bark from a mesquite trunk. Another punched into the dirt near his knee. He dropped flat and fired twice in quick succession, the recoil thudding against his shoulder. One raider fell, clutching his chest. The other vanished into brush, his curses fading. The camp erupted into chaos. Raiders scrambled for their guns, some rushing to mount their horses, others ducking behind crates and barrels. The air filled with the acrid tang of black powder. The rancher kept low, circling wide, moving with the patience of a predator. He wasn't here for a brawl. He was here to thin their numbers before they knew what hunted them. Then a bullet found him. It tore across his left shoulder, spinning him to the ground. He bit back a groan, dragging himself behind a boulder. Blood soaked through his shirt, hot and sticky. He pressed a hand against the wound, breathing hard, listening to the raiders close in. They were laughing now, confident. The laughter didn't last. A sharp whistle cut through the chaos, high and piercing. From the edge of the creek bed, an arrow hissed through the air, striking a raider in the throat. He collapsed without a sound. Another arrow followed, then another, each one precise, silent. The rancher glimpsed movement in the brush. An older Apache warrior, face painted in dark streaks, bow moving with practiced grace. The raiders shouted in alarm, firing blindly into the trees. The warrior vanished like smoke, reappearing at a different angle, loosing another arrow. Men fell, choking and clutching their wounds. The rancher seized a moment, bracing his rifle and firing into confusion. Minutes stretched into eternity. By the time the shooting quieted, 3 raiders lay dead, and the rest had fled deeper into the canyon. The warrior stepped from the brush, tall and lean, his black hair streaked with gray. His eyes were dark and calm, fixed on the rancher. The rancher stayed still, rifle resting across his knees. "She was yours," he said softly. The warrior gave no sign of surprise, but something flickered in his gaze, pain, deep and ancient. He walked closer, bow in hand, arrows slung across his back. He studied the rancher, the blood on his shirt, the hard set of his jaw. "They killed her to start a war," the rancher said. "They want settlers and tribes at each other's throats while they pick the bones clean." The warrior's eyes narrowed. He said something in Apache, voice low, steady. The rancher didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. The warrior knelt, pressed his palm to the earth, then touched his chest. A gesture of grief. "I buried her," the rancher said. "She deserved better than what they gave her." The warrior looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once. They moved quickly, both men wounded in different ways but bound by shared purpose. The warrior led him to a narrow ravine, where water trickled between stones. There, under the cover of scrub and shadow, he cleaned the rancher's wound with practiced hands, binding it tightly with strips of cloth. The rancher winced but said nothing. Pain was just another part of the landscape. When it was done, they sat together in silence. The warrior sharpened the blade with slow, precise strokes, the rasp of stone on steel filling the air. The rancher reloaded his rifle, his hand steady despite the throbbing in his shoulder. "Name's not important," the rancher said finally, breaking the silence. "All that matters is those men die." The warrior glanced at him, eyes unreadable, then gave a single nod. He reached into a pouch and withdrew a small, carved amulet. A bird of prey with wings spread wide. He pressed it into the rancher's hand. "For her," he said in halting English. The rancher closed his fingers around it. The wood was smooth, warm from the warrior's touch. He slipped it into his pocket, without a word. That night, they tracked the raiders by starlight. The warrior moved like a shadow, reading the land with ease. Broken branches, faint hoofprints, a scrap of cloth snagged on thorns. Each sign spoke to him, and the rancher followed. They didn't speak much. Words weren't needed. By midnight, they stood on a ridge overlooking a deeper canyon. Below, the raiders' camp flickered with firelight. More men had gathered, at least a dozen, their laughter carrying on the wind. The leader sat apart, a massive figure hunched near the flames, his face lit by an orange glow. Even from this distance, the rancher felt the weight of his presence. The man radiated violence. The warrior pointed, voice low. "He killed her." The rancher's jaw tightened. He studied the leader's silhouette, the way he held himself, the scar that ran from his temple to his jaw, the casual confidence of someone who believed himself untouchable. "Tomorrow," the rancher said. "We finish it tomorrow." The warrior nodded. They lay low in the brush, waiting out the night. The prairie stretched around them, silent but alive. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of smoke and sweat, and somewhere in the dark, a coyote howled. The rancher closed his eyes for a moment, seeing again the girl's lifeless body swaying in the dusk. He felt the weight of the rifle at his side, the knife on his belt, the quiet rage burning in his chest. Dawn would come soon enough, and with it, reckoning. The sky was bruised with the first hint of dawn when they moved. The fire in the raiders' camp had burned low, a dull orange glow flickering against canvas tents and wagon wheels. Men lay scattered around the clearing, some asleep, others nursing bottles, rifles propped against saddles. The leader sat apart near the embers, sharpening a knife, his scarred face lit like a carving of stone. The rancher and the Apache warrior crept down the ridge, keeping in the shadows, boots whispering against dry earth. The air smelled of smoke and unwashed men, thick with the quiet before violence. The rancher's rifle was steady in his hands, though his shoulder throbbed with every breath. Beside him, the warrior moved like water, his bow strung, an arrow already notched. They reached the edge of camp as a breeze swept through the canyon, rattling branches. A horse whinnied, shifting nervously. One of the raiders stirred, blinking toward the dark shapes at the tree-line. The rancher fired first. The crack of his rifle shattered the stillness, and the raider dropped, blood soaking the dust beneath him. Chaos erupted. Men scrambled for weapons, curses ripping through the dawn air. The warrior's arrows flew swift and silent, striking throats and chests with deadly precision. The rancher advanced, firing again, the rifles but slamming into his wounded shoulder. He gritted his teeth and kept moving. A raider charged him with a hatchet, screaming. The rancher swung his rifle like a club, cracking the man across the skull, then finished him with a shot to the gut. Another came from behind, and the warrior's knife flashed, quick and sure, ending him before he reached them. Gunfire roared. The canyon echoed with screams, bullets snapping through brush, tents collapsing in sparks as lanterns spilled. The raiders were fierce, seasoned killers, but they had not expected judgment to come at dawn. The rancher fought with grim efficiency, every shot placed with care. He had been in battles before, but this was different. This was personal. The leader emerged through the smoke, towering over the chaos, a revolver in each hand. His voice cut through the noise, deep and commanding. "Hold your ground," he barked. He moved with the confidence of a man who had survived 100 fights and didn't fear dying in the 101st. The rancher stepped into the clearing, rifle raised, face set in stone. The leader's eyes found him, cold and amused. "You," the man said, voice like gravel. "I heard of you. Thought you'd be smarter than this." "You killed a child," the rancher said. The leader shrugged. "She was a message. War's coming. Folks best pick a side. I already picked mine." They stared at each other. Two men cut from the same brutal cloth, shaped by violence and loss. The leader holstered one revolver and gestured with the other. "Put the gun down. Let's see if you're man enough without it." The rancher lowered his rifle, set aside, and drew his revolver. His hand was steady despite the pain radiating through his body. Around them, the fight raged, but it felt distant, muffled, as if the world had narrowed to this single moment. The leader grinned, a cruel slash of teeth. On 3. Neither man counted. The leader's gun cleared leather in a blur, but the rancher's shot cracked first. The bullet struck just below the man's collarbone, spinning him backward. He fired wildly, the shot kicking up dirt near the rancher's boots. Another shot rang out from the warrior's bow. An arrow buried itself in the leader's thigh, dropping him to one knee. The rancher advanced, revolver aimed steady. She was just a child. The leader spat blood, sneering. "Ain't no children in war." The rancher's shot silenced him. The camp fell quiet. Smoke curled into the pale morning sky, mingling with the metallic scent of blood. Bodies lay scattered among overturned crates and trampled earth. The surviving raiders had fled, their horses tearing away in a cloud of dust. The warrior retrieved the wooden sign from the rancher's saddlebag and placed it on the dead leader's chest. The black letter stood stark against the man's blood-soaked shirt. "For her," the warrior said softly. Together, they dragged the bodies into a pile and set them ablaze. Flames roared, devouring the wreckage of cruelty, their glow painting both men in shades of gold and shadow. The warrior stood motionless, face unreadable, as the smoke climbed into the sky. The rancher watched too, his revolver still in hand, until the fire was all that moved. When it was done, they rode back in silence. The prairie was wide and empty, a canvas wiped clean. The rancher's shoulder throbbed with each hoofbeat, and blood still seeped through his bandage, but he felt lighter, as if some burden he'd carried for years had finally shifted. They stopped at the hill where the girl lay buried. The morning sun touched the wooden marker, turning it to gold. The warrior knelt, pressing his palm to the earth. He murmured something in his own tongue, voice thick with grief and reverence. The rancher dismounted and stood beside him, hat in hand, head bowed. They buried the leader there, too, a nameless grave beneath a sky that stretched forever. The sign was planted in the soil above him, its message now a warning to any who passed. Justice had no language but the land, and the land remembered everything. When the grave was filled, the warrior turned to the rancher. "You go now," he said quietly. The rancher nodded. He had no words to offer. He swung into the saddle, wincing as his wound pulled, and tipped his hat in silent farewell. The warrior stood by the grave, a sentinel carved in shadow and sunlight. The rancher rode slow, the prairie stretching out ahead of him, a vast sea of gold and green. The wind carried the scent of sage, and somewhere far off a hawk cried. He didn't know where he was going, maybe back to the ranch, maybe farther west where the land swallowed men whole. All he knew was that the girl's face would follow him, a reminder of the cruelty men were capable of, and the thin line that kept him from becoming like them. He reached the ridge and paused, looking back one last time. The graves were small against the horizon, but he felt their weight as if they were carved into his own bones. He touched the amulet in his pocket. The carved bird smoothed beneath his fingers, and for the first time in years, something like peace flickered through him. The wind rose, whispering over the prairie, carrying away the smoke and blood, leaving only silence. He nudged his horse forward, riding into the endless morning. Behind him, the hill stood quiet, marked by a wooden sign that would tell no names, only a warning: white man don't forgive. But the land knew, and so did he.